Hello, all you wonderful Authors Love Readers podcast listeners out there. I'm so happy that you're here. Before this episode starts, I want to talk a little bit about Patreon. And the first thing I want to say is we have a charter Patreon supporter, Linda D. I'm so excited that we have a Patreon supporter and that she was the one who broke the ice and started us. And amazingly, then we have two more supporters who came right behind her. We have Jennifer S. and Laura D. We hope more of you will join Lisa, Jennifer, and Laura in becoming a Patreon supporter of Authors Love Readers podcast. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm asking for your support of the podcast through Patreon donations. Let me tell you, it's really hard for me to ask. As my friends would tell you, I'm not good at asking for help at all. The reason that I set up the Patreon for the Authors Love Readers podcast, it is not for me as an individual author. It's strictly for the podcast. I would love for the podcast to become self-supporting because I've been supporting it to this point. The expenses include having the podcasts edited, because you'll be surprised to know we talk longer than you actually listen. And I have a monthly fee for hosting the files because these are big files. And what I would love is to have people donate, a couple dollars a month would be terrific. It would be a sign of support and it would help defray some of these costs. So that would be the way I could keep the podcast going on. And I hope you'll consider that. Thank you. Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker. Now, let's start the show. I have my own peculiar desert island in which you are allowed to bring 3 movies. And so there's some way to play movies, but you can only bring 3 movies. So you're going to have to watch the same 3 movies over and over and over forevermore. So which 3 movies are you bringing to this desert island?
That's tough. Well, I'll probably bring Pride and Prejudice, the one with Colin Firth. It's my favorite, but it's also very long, so it would last a long time. All the episodes. I would definitely bring The Beach House because I'm very fond and grateful that they made a film of that.
Of course.
And the third one is the hard one. It'd be something like Meet Me in St. Louis, a good old feel-good film that I can always count on to make me feel good and sing the songs. I think it would be either that or The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, another great old movie that never disappoints. So one of those two, I'd probably close my eyes and pick one and see which one it was.
Those are great. I might take a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movie for the singing and the dancing and get it both in. So how has the way you approach writing or approach a book changed from when you were first starting, whether you want to take it from before being published or when you were first published to now? Do you approach a book in a different way?
Yes, well, it's all about experience and knowledge. When I was younger, I didn't, I did the typical all the back history was dumped because you think, oh my God, the reader has to know all this before we begin. And over time, your craft sharpens and you know where to begin a novel. And for me, it's a decision point, and it's one part of it because I have the story outline in my head, and sometimes very soon after beginning, it's all scoped out. But that first sentence when I begin is a scary moment because I know each book that I write has a different tone. I try to figure out how best to get my message across in this book. And so when I write that first sentence, it's when I'm ready to set the tone for the whole book. And it's a very intense moment, and when I do, it's like bursting a bubble, and then the story comes out very fast, at least the first shitty draft. And after that, the rest is craft when you do revisions. But one of the issues of writing under the schedule that I have is that I have to write long and very hard without breaks. Yeah, I know some people talk about how many years it takes them to write a book, but I defy them to say, yeah, but I write without getting dressed, without cooking, without getting out of the house for a month. So it's that kind of intensity. But when you're writing like that, I think you're also in a zone, so you can write fast.
You stay inside the book.
Yeah, you don't let go. And it's not healthy. I don't think it's good for my well-being, and I'm trying to change it, but I don't know if I can. I've done it for so long. I don't know if I can change. So for me, that first sentence, a beginning a book, is piercing the bubble.
Will that sentence stay the same, or do you go back and tweak it?
I'll tweak it, but sometimes it stays the same. I'll never forget the one time I wrote what I think is still the best opening paragraph I've ever written. And 5 years later, I saw that paragraph in another author's opening, and it was just changed a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. And I wanted to sue her, and I thought of authors that have successfully done that. I did not. My publisher advised against it, and I let it go, but I kind of regret it. But that's the whole issue of plagiarism is such a painful issue when it happens to you.
It is incredibly painful, and it's becoming more prolific. And as we know, there's also now that people doing what they call mosaic plagiarism.
What is mosaic?
They take pieces from different people's books and cobble it together into a Frankenstein's monster of a book and sell it.
I hope they fail. I mean, honestly,
some are being caught, so that's
good.
Yeah, but they'll find some. People who cheat will find some other way to cheat and steal.
That's not the art of writing, and I feel sorry for them because there's a real struggle, but there's a joy to creating. And I am inspired by authors, of course I am, but you don't copy them. You try not to read their work. If you admire a writer, you shouldn't read her work while you're writing a book. Which is why, for me, the biggest vacation is going off and being able to read, because it's when I'm not writing and I get to just catch up. And I also think with audiobooks, there's less likely to have the words like interfere with your own writing, or there's less risk of plagiarizing because you're enjoying the audio of the story.
Interesting.
But I don't feel the same sense of words on a paper. I just don't want the temptation. I don't want to do it mistakenly,
Yeah.
I'm paranoid about it. But you do know words play in your mind.
And one of the problems I have is I will write something and then I'll take it out of a book, and then I'll start to write, and I can't remember if
you wrote it or you copied it down.
No, if I already have it in another book.
And
okay. So I'll end up going back, and I now have 50 books, and I'll go back and 50.
Oh my word!
And I'll go back and try to search for phrases. It's phrases rather than
I know
big chunks or anything.
Myself.
Yeah.
Because how many ways can you describe the marsh? There's. I mean, that's why I tell my readers sometimes, I've got to go to the mountains. I just need to use something different to describe, because my books are so landscape rich that I spend a lot of time with description, and and
that becomes a character.
Yeah,
too.
Definitely. I mean, the beach house itself is a character in the novel.
Mm.
You have to describe it over and over again using the same words because it's both familiar to my readers, which I think is reassuring, but also there's only so many ways I can describe mullioned windows. It,
And do you want to take the time to
oh,
give 20 words when mullioned windows will say it? So,
absolutely.
we skimmed over this, but let's come back to the Beach House was made into a movie. What was that experience like, and the experience of seeing your story different?
It was pretty great. I remember when Andy McDowell called and her voice message was on my machine, and I didn't answer for a week because anyone who, as you well know, I'm not really good with mechanics or phones. And when we met and we talked, what was amazing was we met on Sullivan's Island. She came in and she wanted to produce it, but she wasn't sure what role to play. And I said, well, you have to be Kara, because this is true. When I wrote the book, The Beach House, and it was 15 years earlier at the time, Andy McDowell was the actress in my mind who I designed Kara
Oh,
after.
wow. Yeah.
And so she said, I think I'm too old to play Kara now. And I said, you look so young. You go right ahead. You are Kara. So she agreed, but it takes 3 years to get the script done, to get it approved. And then it was a more complex story. So it was chosen to be a Hallmark Hall of Fame, which allows for a bigger breadth of a movie. And
Mm-hmm.
when that was decided, she said, I'm going to play Lovey. I just can't play an ingenue. And she made the character her own. So I went out to Tybee Island, which is in Georgia, and she showed me the house, and I was able to help pick it and, well, at least give my approval. And they
Oh,
chose a
cool.
house that was just what I had in mind, which was fun. And the first day of filming that I observed was when all the turtle team was there and they were seeing a turtle nest emerge. And they were all puppets and computers. It wasn't,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I know it was cost them a lot of money to do such a great job. But I told them in September, you're not going to find a lot of turtles. And at any rate, I cried. It was a moment. And then to
Mm.
see the whole film come together, it it was it was something, I have to say. It was they did Andy McDowell loved the story. She's a southerner and she really knew what she wanted done and she did a great job.
That's so terrific because so many authors have not so great
I know,
experiences.
I know.
It's wonderful that it was so positive for
And
you.
sometimes you have readers say, yeah, but they didn't include and they tell a subplot. And I said, but you only have 2.5 hours in a movie, and
Yeah.
you have to understand and remember that a film is an interpretation of a novel. It's not a blow by blow. And I think that they succeeded. As an author, I'm very pleased. The acting was
That's
superb.
wonderful, Mary Alice. So I have a couple weird questions,
Okay.
and a lot of people go, but I think you may like this one. Um, if your writing were a color, what would it be?
Blue,
A specific blue? Because there's lots of range of blues.
ocean blue, when it's the same
Okay.
color as the sky, because the ocean mirrors the sky. And if the sky is stormy, you'll see a gray green ocean. If the sky is clear blue without a cloud
Mm.
in it, the ocean's the same color. Not a Caribbean blue, it's just the Atlantic Ocean blue.
They use that color a lot on your covers,
They
don't
do.
they?
Yeah, I love it.
That's cool. Do you know where your love of story came from?
I always had, as far back as I can remember, a love of story. I told you about fairies. I used to go look for fairies. I used to, my sister and I would sing to trees, make up songs. I am the eldest or third eldest of 10, one of the eldest girls. And with 10 children, our job was to put my brothers and sisters down for naps and babysit. And
Mm.
we were always making up stories. So as long as I can remember, I loved stories and made them up, and songs. I think back in the
Oh,
day, we
interesting.
didn't, we didn't have TV much, and we certainly didn't have the internet or anything like that. So we were bored a lot, and I think that's a playground for the imagination, is just to be bored and to find something to do.
Let me ask you another weird question first. Can you think of any good advice that you've received, but you ignored it? And how did that turn out? Ooh, that was a wicked laugh.
What sprang to mind was, I'll remember when I was just starting out, and I released The Long Road Home, which was my first novel.
Mm,
And Nora wrote a blurb for it, which I'll always be grateful to her. She was very generous. And then I wrote that fantasy book, Second Star to the Right. And because it was a fantasy, I published it as Mary Alice Cruzy with my married name, which is a spelling, Swiss spelling, which no one to this day can spell correctly. So I remember Noah said to me, "Why did you launch two names? Why didn't you just use the same name?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want my readers to be confused. One was a women's contemporary story, and the other was a fantasy contemporary." She goes, "Mary Alice, they weren't that different." She was right. She was right. When Second Star of the Right came out, it was the best book no one ever read. So I
oh,
republished it many years later under Monroe, and people bought it. But it was funny.
oh, that's
No
great.
one. She was 100% right. And the other advice I got was from one of the early RWA craft workshops. Was when they said, don't spend too much time rewriting and perfecting those first three chapters, because in our groups we used to read chapters and to get
Yeah.
for critiques, and they said, you're probably going to throw away the first chapter anyway. That was the best advice I got. You just keep going. And I've learned that I really don't know what the story's truly about until I get to about page 100. And then it's like, oh no, now I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
Now I know. So if you spend all your time perfecting three chapters, you're never going to finish that book.
Well, I always had trouble in the critique groups because I write out of order. So so I wouldn't be giving them the first three chapters until the whole book was done. Yeah.
Well, I always love to read. I teach. I every once in a while I'll do a writer's retreat, and it's a kind of giving back, and I will teach. And it's an intense course, but I always review and critique the first 5 pages. I don't want to see anything later, because if they can't get me in the first 5 pages, they're never going to sell that book. So I critique, and so often you do see a lot of back history. But
Mm,
what you can tell in 5 pages is that that author has voice, and that you can't
yes.
teach.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of judging of contests, and you could see, you just knew some people were gonna do
Right,
it, and whether that particular piece worked or not,
right.
there was there was something. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
interesting. Um, Now, I have a couple questions from readers I would like to
Sure.
ask you, and one is about what's your favorite place to write?
I'm very particular. I have to be in my office here at South Carolina. But it's kind of a desk that looks like a Captain Kirk desk, where surrounds me with my papers around me and my books around me. There's always at least two dogs at my feet. And I need to close the door and turn off the phone and write. I don't even want music, because I need to feel safe. I go crazy. I just
Mhm.
don't understand people who say they can write in Starbucks. And I know people do, some good friends of mine. And I could probably
Yeah.
edit there, but when I write, I just lose myself, and I'm afraid that I would never be able to do that.
It's
Yeah,
vulnerable.
and you're
You're
vulnerable when you
vulnerable
write.
when you lose yourself.
So I
Yeah.
write in my office always. And it doesn't matter if it's a fancy office or a little or very beautiful office. It's just where you feel safe.
Do you have a
I
view?
do. Well, let's put it this way. I used to have a view. I took over 2 or 3 rooms in this house over 17 years. Well, now, my God, 20 years, where I moved around trying to find the right feng shui for my room. And when the kids moved out, I took over the upstairs family room as a big room with a big southern porch out the back and it overlooks the coastal.
Oh,
And I said, no one else is here. I work 12 hours a day. I'm taking this room. It was the first time I ever didn't sort of crowd myself in a corner. And I made a really nice office and I love it. The color is this really pretty uh, palladian blue green that feels like fresh and outdoors. The only thing is, over the last 20 years, all the little houses behind me, because I'm on a high lot, are now mansions.
yeah.
The little houses are mansions. So I lost all my
Oh,
views, but I still have a nice porch
oh,
and it's sunny, and my canaries are in the house with me, and I still feel like this is my special place.
oh, that's great. Uh, well, I, on the other hand, have managed to pick, and when I moved to Kentucky, I managed to pick the room in the house that's the coldest in the winter and the hottest in the summer.
Time to move.
But I move around a lot. I write on my laptop. I'll write on the deck. I'll write on a upholstered chaise in my
Oh,
family
that's
room.
nice.
I'm a bit of a nomad,
I've,
so
I've been trying that. I got a new laptop and I'm trying to move from spot to spot, and I just wander. I have to like buckle myself in, and I've got to relax the back chair from sitting 12 hours. And it works, by the way. And just pound the keys. It's really all about focus.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think there's an element of Pavlov's dogs, that if you have written the books in that spot, that triggers then writing,
Yeah, yeah.
coming back to the writing. So,
Any trick I can play, but I just have to get. And deadlines provide fear. It's a good motivation,
yeah.
and I'm always I'm always attentive to my deadlines. I try really hard to make them, but the deadlines get tighter and tighter and tighter, and it's just kind of a hamster wheel after a while. It's a good thing I love what I do because it's all I do.
It is the other issue for me always is, how would I get all these people out of my head if I don't write? It's going to get really crowded in there.
No, honestly, being a grandmother changed everything for that. When I'm with the grandchildren, I'm not thinking of books or stories.
Ooh, that's
It's great. And
wonderful.
also, one of the
Yeah.
things about going out into nature is that when I'm doing my research, I'm I'm observant and my antennas are up, but I don't have a story. Totally in the moment with whether it's a dolphin or a turtle or whatever animal I'm with. And that not only informs me as a writer, but it creates a kind of acute awareness of what's around me. And so I'm outside a lot
Mm,
when I do research. I really spend a lot of time outdoors, but it's part of my job. I look at that as research.
it is. Um, and I think sometimes people, it's
It is. It
experiential
is. But
research.
also, even with the
Yeah.
last book,
And that's very important.
The Summer Guests, which is different because it's a hurricane evacuation, which we're in the season now. But I take my readers off the beach up into the mountains. But I had to connect with horses. And I'm not a horseback rider. I don't own horses. And it's not an endangered species, but I never really knew horses. And whether it's any animal, but especially them, I had to connect with this big beast. I mean, it's a big animal, and they're not just going to befriend you. So it took
They are.
time to,
Yeah.
I slept over the barn and to feed them and to brush them and to walk them and to take care of them until they trusted me. And in time, when you look at that beautiful eye, I don't think any animal on earth has
Mm.
eyes as beautiful as a horse. When you look at their beautiful liquid eyes, you know when they recognize you. Feel it. There's a
Mm.
connection there, and they have so many facial expressions that will give you clues as to what they want or what they're thinking. So, with all animals and wildlife, I have found that words are not necessary. It's a kind of communication that is beyond words and much more profound, which is why I tell humans not to feel like you have to touch that dolphin or you have to reach out and pet that animal. Just let it be and communicate with a kind of connection and awareness. I hope to teach people that through my writings when my characters do that, but certainly in my own life, it enriches it so much. Even monarch butterflies, when
Oh,
they
that's
first come out of the chrysalis and they're on your hand, they don't flutter away right away. They just pause, and there's a moment when it's just you with that small butterfly on your finger, and then instinct kicks in, and that butterfly's gone. But there's that moment
mm.
of connection where there's no fear.
Mm. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. You mentioned doing middle school books. Do you have childhood books that
Mm.
really affected you, or that made you go, "Wait a minute, stories. This is what I want to do."
Yeah, for sure. Not so much the book as a child. I loved the story of Peter Pan and frankly the movie. I was absolutely
Mm.
I mean, it's embarrassing to say I was probably 7 years old and I left the window open for Peter to take me to Neverland. I mean, that's embarrassing. But I did write a book called Second Star to the Right, and so I wrote a book about that. And whenever I feel touched by something that's otherworldly, I try to write a book about it. There's one more coming, mermaids. I know there's something I've got to say about mermaids. But for children,
Oh, interesting. Now, how are you going to do the research on
well,
that?
I've already done it actually, and it's based on a real
Ah,
hurricane that happened. So I know the rumors and the fables about it. It's just about finding time. I'm so committed to contracts to write Mary Alice Monroe novels about the environment that until I can take a breath, the other just has to wait for a while.
isn't that, I think sometimes about, people will come up to authors and say, "I have this story idea. You write it and we'll split it."
Oh my
And
God.
that and always so many of us are like, "I have 143 ideas. I'm never going to get to them all."
It's so true. It's like I have to live long enough to be able to write the stories. And you know what it is? Sometimes someone will say something like that, and it won't be their story because that gives us the heebie jeebies. But it's more sometimes they'll say, I had an experience, and they'll tell you about that experience. And you think, there's something there I can use. There's something. So I do like to listen. I think a good writer is a better
Oh,
listener. I
yes.
remember
Yeah.
once when I was doing work
Yeah.
with dolphins, the trainer who became a friend of mine, we were in the water and we're teaching a dolphin to fetch something. And the dolphin was being really insistent with her, and you feel a tingle when they echolocate on you. It's a little tingle. And and I said,
Mm.
"What is that?" She said, "Oh, she's curious. There's something, maybe if you have a heart problem, they'll tingle, they'll use their echolocation to find your pacemaker, for example. Or when I work with wounded warriors, they had shrapnel in them or a bullet, and the dolphin would realize
Oh
it was
my
different."
gosh.
So she told me the story of the one time the dolphin was echolocating and she kept shooing it away and it would come back and echolocate some more and she would shoo it away and get out of here. What are you doing? Well, the next week she found out from the doctor she was pregnant and the dolphin knew,
Oh.
she saw that little fetus and was curious. So you can bet that got in the book.
Yeah, you
You can't
bet.
make that up.
I refer to us as the best recyclers. We take everything that happens to us or we hear about goes into the
It's
hopper
true.
and comes
You
out
know,
some way.
it's all
Yeah.
filtered through. So I always tell everyone, just, anything you tell me is fodder for stories, except your name, except your
Now,
name. I'll give them that. But also, a character has to have a job to do in the novel. And if you use a real person, at least for a primary character, you're limited by that person's strengths and flaws. And you need to create a character that, like a gun in the drawer, that will
serves the
serve the
story.
story.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You need that elbow
Right.
room with character that you don't
A
have if
real
you tried
person.
to use a
Which
real
I always think
person.
is interesting for the people who write books, especially the wave of historicals now, which I love, about women in history and how much they use that is accurate and how much literary license they have to, create dialogue and a character that is a real person.
Well, and it's so interesting too, using a real person. Um, when I write a character, and I suspect very much it's the same for you, you're inside that character. You have truly unlimited
Yes.
access. You know everything, and there's no way to do that with a real person. Even if you knew the person super well, you would not be able to do that.
I don't know because I've not done it, but I was talking to my good friend Patty Callahan Henry, and she wrote an amazing book called Becoming Mrs. Lewis. And it's about the poet Joy Davidman who married C.S. Lewis. And it's a triumph. It really is. And different than anything she'd written before. And she was actually called in a sense to write this novel. And when I read it, I was moved about how profoundly beautiful it was and deep. And when I talked to her about it, I assumed that she had a treasure trove of letters to delve into because she had
Mm.
created a voice that, in this case, you totally forgot it was Patty writing. You believed it was Joy Davidman. And apparently she did not. She did extraordinary
Oh,
research, but
wow.
there were no letters. And I was stunned because she created a voice for a character, her inner thoughts that she had to create. And I'm convinced to this day that she channeled Joy David because there's some connection. And I know I feel it when I'm in the zone where you're almost taking dictation. And you just want to
Mm-hmm.
say, whoever I'm plugged into right now, thank you very much. I think
Yes.
it's a great moment, and it's not all the time, unfortunately. But when it does happen, you're breathing rarefied air. And I do think, we have our guides, and I think we do. In her case, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Joy Davidman wasn't plugged into her because the writing was so perfect.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.